At the Recap Academy of Magic, every student has unique magical abilities, which is why they were accepted into the academy. However, we are surprised to see a student in his final year who has no magical abilities at all. This is our protagonist, Will. We see him sitting in his class while Professor Edward is explaining different ways to ignite fire, but Will is busy writing and not paying attention. Next to him is his magical cat, Kiki. Professor Edward calls on him to come forward and demonstrate what he was just talking about, but Will isn't paying attention, so he doesn't hear the professor. Professor Edward gets annoyed and starts yelling at Will until he realizes what's happening. Will then stands up and walks in front of a stone, and Professor Edward asks him to ignite it. Will takes his wand and tries to cast the spell to make fire, but nothing happens. The whole class laughs and mocks him, except for his friend Colette, who sits there upset about what's happening. Professor Edward becomes frustrated with Will and tells him that the only thing he's good at is taking notes, and that he doesn't deserve to be in Recap Academy. Will stands there unable to respond to anyone, knowing they're right. One of the students in the class, named Cheyenne, who is arrogant and a bully, uses his magic to ignite the stone just to humiliate Will even more. But Professor Edward tells Cheyenne to stop showing off, putting out the fire and getting angry with everyone. He tells them that this academy is for real magicians, as magic is power, and it is what earns respect among people. Anyone who doesn't have magical abilities is a failure. He then tells Will that his intelligence and studying won't get him anywhere, and that he should leave the academy. After the lesson, which was heavy on Will's heart, he exits the class. However, Cheyenne and his friends, Laryl and Jordan, catch up with him to mock him. They laugh at him, saying how bad he looked when he went hunting monsters the day before to earn some points to stay in the academy. Just then, Colette shouts at them from the end of the corridor and goes to scold Cheyenne, telling him to stay away from Will. Cheyenne asks her why she always defends Will, and Colette responds by saying that Will is much better and kinder than him. Cheyenne laughs and mocks her, saying that Will's kindness won't keep him in the academy for long. Before leaving, he tells Will that he will never become a Mangacapped and that he should listen to Professor Edward and leave the academy as soon as possible. After Cheyenne leaves, Colette tells Will not to be upset because Professor Edward acted very wrong by mocking him in front of everyone. Will tells her that it's okay because he's used to it. He acknowledges that he doesn't have magical abilities and that Professor Edward wasn't wrong. He then tells Colette that he is lucky to have her by his side at school, otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to continue. Colette becomes very shy and yells at him because she isn't used to hearing kind words, and it's obvious that she's embarrassed because she likes him. After she finishes yelling, Will stands and watches a tower of light reaching from the earth to the sky. He feels so happy as he looks at the light. He tells Colette that he can't believe that the Mangacapped sorcerers are the ones holding up the sky so it doesn't collapse on them. We then learn that a long time ago, evil soldiers from another world fought on Earth and were about to destroy the sky until 5 of the magicians, later called Mangacapped, defeated them. They sealed the sky to prevent it from collapsing, and this seal is what creates the light tower that Will is watching. The title of Mangacapped is only given to a few individuals who are incredibly advanced in magic and have many unique abilities. At this moment, Will remembers when he was younger and sitting with his friend Ivy. They were talking about the sun and moon in space. Ivy told him about their movements around each other, and both were fascinated by what they read. They wanted to see it themselves. Ivy promised him that one day they would go together and see it. Ivy was extremely talented and kept excelling in magic until she became a Mangacapped as a child. Will, however, lacked magical abilities and was less than average, so he couldn't reach her. But he still remembers their promise and tries to push himself to become a Mangacapped and reach her again. Later, Will goes to Professor Warkner, who is the only one who cares about him. He shows him the body of a monster he fought. Professor Warkner scolds him and gets very angry, asking how he could go to the Aldemas in the light tower, especially on the 7th floor, and fight the monsters there alone. He could have died. Will apologizes and asks him about the points. Professor Warkner tells him he'll give him 2 points, and Will is happy. Professor Warkner then asks if Will still wants to be a Mangacapped. Will confidently says yes. Professor Warkner tells him that to become a Mangacapped, he'll first have to be evaluated by the high institution. To be evaluated, he must graduate from the academy with points in practical training, writing, and magic, which won't be possible without magical abilities. Will then says that's why he's focusing on practical training, as it's the part that will earn him the most points. Professor Warkner, however, tells him honestly that it's not just difficult, it's impossible for him to become a Mangacapped through the points he earns from practical training. At that moment, Professor Warkner notices that Will is upset, so he changes the subject and tells him that he needs to earn at least 4 points by the end of the week because he failed his last exams and needs to make up for the points before he gets expelled. Will becomes even more upset because there are only 2 days left before the end of the week. He quickly flips through his notebook, looking for anything he can do to earn points. Professor Wartner mentions that he heard there is a monster on the 6th floor of the Aldamas worth about 4 points, and no one has probably hunted it yet. Will becomes very excited and hugs Professor Wartner in happiness, but we find out that Cheyenne was standing at the door, overhearing them. He decides to go hunt the monster before Will does, in order to make sure Will loses the 4 points and gets expelled from the academy. That night, Cheyenne takes his friends and they head to the 6th floor to hunt the monster. He tells them they must capture it so they can get rid of Will because they don't want a failure in the academy. There, his friends ask him if it's safe for the 3 of them to go alone and fight a high-level monster. Because Cheyenne is arrogant and wants to show off his strength, he brushes off their concerns. Meanwhile, Will also arrives at the 6th floor, but he's in a different spot from Cheyenne. He tells Kiki that he's happy because he fought this monster before and knows all its weak points. Suddenly, a huge monster with red eyes attacks Cheyenne and his friends from behind, which is completely different from what they expected. They are all terrified and scream. Will hears them and is surprised to find that someone else is on the floor and being attacked. He runs quickly to save them before anything happens, but when he arrives, he finds Cheyenne on the ground, trying to fight the monster but terrified and unable to do anything. The monster in front of them is not the one they expected, it's a completely different one, much stronger, and worth 10 points. Will notices that Cheyenne's magic isn't affecting the monster at all and wonders how the monster even made it to this floor when it doesn't belong there. Will starts thinking about what to do and whether or not he should help Cheyenne. He recalls everything Cheyenne has done to him since childhood and all the bullying he faced because of him. He's about to leave Cheyenne to die and end it all, but he can't bring himself to do it. He charges at the monster, but instead of using his wand like everyone else, he grabs a sword and fights it. We see that Will actually has extremely strong and unique combat skills. Meanwhile, Professor Edward goes to Professor Wartner and tells him that Cheyenne and his friends ran off to the Aldamas alone. Professor Wartner is shocked and immediately uses his magical crystal. Through the crystal on Kiki's head, they are able to watch Will. They see Cheyenne there as well. Professor Edward stands in shock at what he's seeing, as he's used to seeing a magician, but now he's seeing a warrior with extraordinary abilities. Professor Wartner tells him that Will is different from all of them because no magician has the combat abilities that Will possesses. A single strike from Will's sword is like lightning striking anyone in its path. While they are talking, Will defeats the monster, leaving both Professor Edward and Cheyenne in shock. But Professor Edward becomes very angry and says to Wartner, "How did the sword manage to overpower magic?" He storms off, upset. Meanwhile, Will returns the next day with the monster's corpse, placing it in front of Professor Wartner and earning his 10 points. Then we go back 5 years, and we see young Will at the academy being bullied by everyone because he has no magical abilities. The students gossip, saying that he was probably admitted to the academy because of Ivy, and now that she's a Magia Vander, they'll likely expel him. This deeply upsets Will, and we see that Professor Wartner took him at that time and was taking him to the academy director to ask if Will would be expelled or allowed to stay. Director Calden looks at him for a moment and then hands him a sword, casting a spell around him and placing several shields on him. Will quickly takes the sword and destroys all the shields around him with incredible speed, so much so that even Professor Wartner falls to the ground in shock. The director laughs and tells Professor Wartner that they'll let Will stay at the academy. Professor Wartner is stunned and asks how, since Will has no magical abilities. Director Calden replies that it's very interesting to find a sword capable of replacing a magic wand, and they must keep Will. Will asks her if, by staying in the academy and working hard, he can reach Ivy and become a Magia Vander. The director tells him yes, he can. Will is thrilled and leaves. We return to the present, and after Will leaves Professor Wartner's office, they both head to class for their next lesson. Professor Wartner stands in front of the class and explains that in order to become a Magia Vander, they must reach the Tower of Light and pass through the high institution. There are 2 ways to do this. The first way is to invent a new type of magic, and the second way is to earn no less than 7,200 points. He tells them that very few people can invent a new type of magic, so most will have to become Magia Vander by earning a lot of points. That's why he offers additional lessons after the academy to help them earn more points. After the lesson ends, Will is upset and tells Colette that he's nearly finished with all the points he could earn from Professor Wartner and doesn't know how else to earn points. Besides, Professor Wartner is the only one who offers supplementary lessons to help them earn extra points. At that time, Cheyenne's friends gather in the school and sit Cheyenne in the middle. They talk about what happened with the monster yesterday, and they believe Cheyenne was the one who defeated it because when they woke up after passing out from shock, all they saw was the dead monster and Cheyenne beside it. They are completely impressed by him and tell the whole school about it. Meanwhile, Cheyenne sits silently, remembering what happened, shocked that it was Will who hunted the monster. As soon as Will and Colette pass by him, Cheyenne quickly grabs Will by the clothes, furious, and demands to know how he did it. Colette, as usual, steps in between them and prevents Cheyenne from doing anything to Will. Cheyenne storms off, angry. Colette asks Will if something happened between him and Cheyenne recently. Will says something did happen, but it's not that important. Meanwhile, Professor Edward goes to Director Calden, visibly furious, and tells her that they must expel Will from the school. Director Calden asks him why and points out that Will is in his final year at the academy. Why does he want him expelled now, just when he's about to graduate? Professor Edward says it's unacceptable for someone to surpass magic without even using it like Will does. Director Calden pulls up a record of the academy's students and tells him that Will excels at almost everything except magic. He could be very useful to them after graduation and could even become a scientist, not necessarily a Magia. Professor Edward, frustrated, says that Will doesn't want that and insists on becoming a Magia. Director Calden agrees that's the problem, but to ease his frustration, she says he can test Will however he wants. If Will passes, he'll stay at the academy. If he fails, he'll be expelled immediately. Professor Edward agrees eagerly, and Director Calden tells him that she'll leave the test type to him, to do as he pleases. Will then goes with Colette to gather his things. Colette helps Will open a door that only opens with a magical incantation. She notices that Will's sword is among his things. They then head to the study hall, and Will begins reviewing again. Colette tells him he's studied this before, but Will says he must work harder because he can't afford to lose any points, especially since he really enjoys the lesson he's studying. He tells her that the dwarf battle they're studying reminds him of himself. He explains that a long time ago, dwarfs were subjected to violence and hard labor, so they decided to unite and fight back to end the oppression. Despite having no magical abilities, they didn't give up and stood against everyone. After he finishes studying, Colette notices that Will's hair has turned white from exhaustion. She jokes with him, trying to cheer him up, when suddenly Professor Edward enters, looking very serious, and tells Will to come to the spell room immediately. They both arrive at the room, and Professor Edward tells Will that he will give him a special lesson to earn points. Will is very surprised because he doesn't understand why Professor Edward would give him a one-on-one lesson. Professor Edward tells him that his task is to land just one blow on him. If he succeeds, he will earn 5 points. If he fails, he will be expelled from the academy. Will panics when he hears the word expelled. Meanwhile, Director Calden tells Professor Wartner that she asked Professor Edward to test Will himself, and they are watching the events unfold from her office. She tells Wartner, who is worried about Will, that just as he supports Will, they must also respect Professor Edward's concerns. That's why she asked him to test Will personally to see if he can become a Magia in the future. Professor Wartner says that this is a very difficult and cruel thing to do because Professor Edward is the closest to being a Magia. Although he failed, he managed to climb the tower's peak, and he's very close to succeeding and becoming one of them. Meanwhile, Will and Professor Edward begin the test. Professor Edward casts spells on Will and around him. Will notices that the spells have a weak effect, but Professor Edward is casting them with great force, and he's unable to break through his defenses, which have no gaps. Will keeps falling, and eventually, he gets injured and bleeds heavily. Professor Edward tells Will that he is only using 2 types of magic, one to create a shield around him and the other to attack him. He gathers about 10,000 spells to use on Will. At that moment, Will realizes just how powerful Professor Edward is, and he knows that he will never be able to break through his defenses or even touch him. He wishes he had his sword with him so that he could end the test quickly. Then, Kiki, his cat, runs out of the room quickly and heads to where Will has left his sword and belongings. Colette is there as well, placing her book and belongings down, very worried about Will, who is taking the lesson alone with Professor Edward. She fears that Professor Edward is now torturing him and beating him with a whip. However, Kiki enters, bleeding, and points to Will's cabinet. As soon as Colette sees that Kiki is injured, she understands something has happened to Will. She quickly opens the cabinet, grabs the sword, and heads to the room. Meanwhile, Professor Edward approaches Will, who is lying on the ground. He tells Will that in order to dream of becoming a Magia, he must defeat one of them. He places his foot on Will's head and tells him that during the Battle of the Dwarfs, there were about 10,000 warriors, but only one magician defeated them all with his magic wand, killing all 10,000 warriors. That's why it's impossible for a sword to ever defeat a magic wand. He tells Will to give up on his ambitions. Will pushes his foot off his head and stands up, telling him that he will never give up on his desire to become a Magia. Professor Edward asks him what motivates him so strongly, without a hint of despair. Will tells him that he wants to be with the one he loves, fulfill his promise, and watch the sunset with Ivy. Professor Edward becomes very angry, seeing Will's reason as trivial. At that moment, Colette arrives and throws Will his sword. From that moment, everything changes. As soon as Will grabs his sword, he is able to block the first spell cast by Professor Edward. The professor is surprised that the sword was able to reflect a spell, which makes him increase his magic power. Will becomes very nervous and anxious, fearing he will fail and be expelled from the academy, as he feels like this is a real test now, a challenge against himself. He runs towards Professor Edward with incredible speed, blocking every spell of the thousands thrown at him. He leaps on top of Professor Edward, breaks his barrier, and finally lands a small scratch on his face. With that, Will succeeds in the test and manages to strike Professor Edward. The professor doesn't comment on the victory. All he says is that he will give Will the 5 points and walks away. At that moment, Will collapses to the ground from exhaustion. Director Calden and Professor Wartner are both very proud of him for managing to defeat Professor Edward and for being so clever in every step he took. At that moment, Will recalls 5 years ago when he said goodbye to Ivy as she was leaving the academy to go to the Tower of Light. She handed him the glasses he wears when fighting and told him he was brave. She then walked away, and Will promised her that he would do whatever it took to join the Magia Vander and that they would go together to watch the sunset from the tower and fulfill their promise to each other. Ivy was deeply moved by his words but tried not to show it. She turned back and told him that they would definitely meet again someday, and then she left. Will sat there, crying, and Professor Wartner stood by, feeling deeply for him. Will told him that this would be the last time he cried, and he would do everything he could to catch up with Ivy. A few days after the test, Will is working for the school, delivering newspapers in his neighborhood, working hard even in his personal life. He meets a dwarf named Donan, who greets him and tells him they'll meet at the restaurant after his work. Will agrees and quickly heads out to deliver the newspapers. However, he trips and drops them all, but he catches them quickly before they fall to the ground. One newspaper falls open to a page with a picture of Ivy, his friend. Under the picture, it says that she managed to invent a new type of magic and became the first to achieve such an incredible feat, creating over 12 types of magic on her own. Will reads a lot about her accomplishments and is very proud of her. He tells himself that just as she works hard, he too will work hard, and he will be able to meet her again. On the last part of the page, something written makes him very excited and shocked. He runs quickly to his room to meet his friend, Rusty, and enters, eager. He asks Rusty if he can make him magical tools. Rusty is surprised and asks why the rush. Will tells him that Ivy has posted a request in the newspaper and needs some items, so he has to prepare quickly. Rusty says he won't be able to attend his classes and will be late, but Will says that Ivy is more important right now. Rusty asks if the request is difficult. Will tells him that she's asking for people to gather ice cores from a snow monster, and it seems Ivy needs many magical catalysts. She will reward those who contribute and gather the items she needs. Will tells Rusty that's why he needs his magical tools because the monster is on the 4th floor. Rusty laughs at Will's enthusiasm but gives him all the tools he has, advising him to be careful. He also feeds Will before he leaves. Will thanks him, remembering a saying from the Queen of Magic, everything is made from the aldemas, and every magician must use their power and intelligence to turn the unknown into the known and make the most of everything that comes their way. Will then heads to the aldemas on the 4th floor. As soon as he arrives, he finds that many people are there for the same goal. However, he's not surprised because he knows it's Ivy's request, and everyone loves her and is ready to do anything for her. Cheyenne and his friends are there too, and we see him defeating all the snow monsters around him with a single spell. Will notices that Cheyenne is fighting angrily, as if he just wants to eliminate the monsters. Will tells himself that he must hurry because with the way things are going, there won't be any monsters left to hunt. He decides to go deeper into the floor and away from the crowd to be on his own. On his way, he sees 3 monsters and a girl lying on the ground, scared of them. He quickly attacks the monsters, defeating all 3 of them in one strike and saving the girl. She is very surprised to see that Will has a sword, not a magic wand. Will asks if she's okay, and she thanks him for saving her. She tells him her name is Iris, and she is in her 4th year at the academy. Meanwhile, at the academy, Colette and her classmate Rose are sitting in Professor Wartner's class, listening to him talk about innovators of new magic. He tells them that if anyone can invent a new type of magic, it will be written in their name and immortalized in history, which will be a great achievement for anyone. Rose, Colette's classmate, asks about Ivy, mentioning that she heard Ivy invented 12 types of magic on her own. Professor Wartner says that Ivy is amazing and unique because the ice magic she invented is the strongest magic currently, and many people want to join her and her ice team. Colette then talks to Rose and mentions that Ivy is the girl Will talks about day and night. Rose notices that Colette is jealous and teases her, saying that she's jealous because she feels Ivy will take her favorite friend away from her. Colette gets upset and yells at Rose during the class. Professor Wartner scolds them for making noise. Colette apologizes and tells Rose that everyone must be out right now, including Will, since they're all in the Aldemas looking for the magical catalysts for Ivy. Meanwhile, Will is still with Iris in the Aldemas, walking together and talking. Will asks Iris if she minds being with him since he doesn't have magical abilities, and everyone is usually embarrassed by him and his company. Iris is very surprised by his words and asks how he could be upset with someone who just saved her a moment ago. She tells him that she respects him and anyone with a special talent. Will really likes her words but feels shy because she's praising him. He asks her if she came here because of Ivy's request as well, and she says yes, as she wants to help the Manhwa and learn more about them. Will thinks to himself that they don't really know anything about their true world, because ever since the war and the energy and magic of the Manhwa created a barrier that covers the entire sky, they haven't seen the real sky, nor do they know what really happened. If this barrier were destroyed, a disaster would occur again, and the entire world could be destroyed. That's why all the students and people are following the orders of the Manhwa, not because they love them, as they think, but because they are protecting themselves. At that moment, Iris interrupts him and says that she once met Ivy. Will asks how, and she explains that she was alone in the Aldemas and got into trouble surrounded by many monsters, thinking she was about to die. Just when she was saying goodbye, Ivy arrived at the perfect moment, defeated all the monsters, froze them, and saved her. Since then, she has been in awe of Ivy and willing to do anything for her. But since coming here, she hasn't found any snow monsters, only ordinary ones. Will lets her speak, then looks at the ground and tells her that a snow monster leaves traces, but the ones ahead of them are much bigger than usual. This means that a very powerful monster is ahead, and they must prepare. He starts following the trail, but Iris stops him, afraid of the monster. Will tells her that the most important thing in the Aldemas is experience, not magic. He pulls out the magical tools that Rusty gave him and prepares them in case they encounter the monster. Suddenly, the monster appears above them, and it's massive, just as Will expected. He pulls Iris away from the monster to keep her safe. Iris tells him that this monster is called Rex, a very powerful snow monster worth about 6 points. And it's stronger than any snow monster that should be here. Will tells her to stay where she is while he takes care of the monster. Iris tells him that physical attacks won't work on this type of monster, and they need magic to defeat it since anyone who touches it will freeze. Will reassures her, telling her not to worry because he's dealt with even more dangerous monsters before. He's prepared and wearing protective gear so he won't freeze. He pulls out some of Rusty's tools and approaches the monster. He uses a rope, wraps it around the monster, then steps back and lights the rope on fire. The monster explodes, and Will is thrilled, thinking to himself that he needs to thank Rusty for the amazing tools he made. When Iris sees Will's abilities, her attitude changes. It turns out that Iris is not as kind as we thought. She thinks to herself that she needs to figure out a way to report Will, and there's something behind her actions that isn't as sweet as it first seemed. Meanwhile, Will takes the core from the monster and tells Iris that they need to leave now since it's getting late. Iris walks away, heading toward the Tower of Light, thinking to herself about Will. Although he can't use magic, his abilities make up for it in a much better way. She reaches the door of the tower, enters, and stands in front of 4 Manhwa, Carriot, Eleanor, Zio, and Ivy. They are having a meeting and talking about the barrier they created in the sky. Iris enters and begins to talk about Will, but they don't let her finish, all of them leaving because they aren't interested at all, except for Ivy, who is very pleased. Iris says to Ivy that she never expected the Will she was talking about to be this strong. Ivy smiles and proudly acknowledges Will's abilities. The next day, they all return to the academy and have lessons. Will tells himself that he needs to gather 7,200 points out of 12,000 to be able to join the Manhwa. Currently, the academy is training with monsters created by the teachers, and the students are required to defeat these monsters using their magical abilities. First, Cheyenne and Colette step up to fight the monsters. Both are very skilled and succeed. Cheyenne's points are nearing 10,000, while Colette's points are 7,300. When it's Will's turn, he tries to defeat the monster without using the sword or the magic wand, but he can't because he's distracted by his classmates who are laughing at him. The monster knocks him down, and he fails the training. Then, 2 other students, Vignal and Lihana, step forward, and they are noticeably stronger with very high points. Afterward, another student named Julius steps up, defeating the monsters with ice magic. He's very impressive as well. After he finishes, Julius goes to Vignal and Lihana, saying he's happy that the 3 of them are close in level and will be competing together. Their combined points are the only ones exceeding 10,000, and one of them is likely to reach the high institution and become a Manhwa. Will stands by, watching them, feeling disappointed because his points aren't enough for him to even graduate, let alone join the high institution. Julius, who is also a bully, doesn't like Will and tells him to stay out of his way so he can pass. His friends, impressed by Julius' ability to defeat the monsters with a single spell, tell him that he'll probably be chosen for the magic festival. Later, Will goes to eat with Colette. She tells him that he must join the magic festival because she doesn't believe that joining the Magia Vander requires just a high number of points. She also says she's heard of people who had fewer than 7,200 points but participated in the festival, won, and were able to reach the high institution. Will understands her point but is nervous because he knows that everyone in the academy will want to join the festival to prove themselves, and he feels his chances are slim. We learn that the Magic Festival is held by the Academy every 2 years and is filled with various activities where magicians show off their skills to the public. Colette tells him that the festival is where it's actually decided who will join and reach the Tower of Light. She mentions that various groups will participate, such as the Lightning Group led by Tresius, the F Group led by Alif, the Flame Group led by Anshindo, and the Ice Fist Group led by Phineas. She tells Will that if one of these groups chooses him, he will be guaranteed entry to the tower without worry. Will says it's not that easy, and he'll need to be a very skilled magician to be chosen or even to graduate from the academy and reach the high institution. Colette mentions that she heard about the observers who are present at the festival. They are the ones who pick out exceptional talents and immediately send them to the high institution. By coincidence, Iris is passing by, and it turns out that she's one of these observers, but disguised as a student. Will tells Colette that he's heard of these observers in the Academy's legends and also says that talentless people like him shouldn't participate in the festival and should work behind the scenes, helping others without drawing attention to themselves. Colette tells him that if he participates this year, he can change the way people see him. Will reminds her of the last time he participated in the 50th Magic Festival when everyone mocked him, throwing things in his face, calling him a cheater because he didn't belong there. It became the worst festival in history due to him, and he had a psychological shock because of it. Will and Colette then watch the other students practicing for the festival, and Colette gets excited, saying that many magicians and scouts will come from all over the city to attend the festival at the academy. They then go to gather their belongings. Colette tells Will that he must make the most of this festival to prove himself in front of everyone. However, Will remains firm in his decision and doesn't want to draw attention to himself, fearing it will be like the last time. Suddenly, Colette senses a strange magic behind them. She looks and realizes there's a hidden barrier. She tells him that this barrier is meant to suppress sound, so she holds Kiki and tells him to remove the barrier. Kiki uses his magical abilities to break the spell and destroy the barrier. Behind it, they find a hidden staircase and hear a sound coming from it. When they go down, they find a group of students making secret bets on who will win the festival. These bets are against the Academy's rules, and they are shocked to see Cheyenne there too. Cheyenne, as usual, is eager to cause trouble for Will and wants to provoke him. Colette stops him, warning Cheyenne not to touch Will, or she'll deal with him herself. Will asks Cheyenne what he's doing there, as he isn't placing bets with the others. Cheyenne's friend replies, saying that he was interested in learning more about Vignal and the others because their points are very high, and he's still behind them. He wished he could be among the top 3 or at least get noticed by them. Cheyenne gets angry at his friends, yelling at them to be quiet, and then tells Colette that the difference between him and the top 3 is that they just scored higher in exams, but as for strength, he might be better than them. After that, they all return to their lessons. After class, Colette tells Will that she wants to go with him to the Aldemus. Will says he won't go right now because he has work at Gina's restaurant and must leave immediately to avoid being late. He arrives at the restaurant and helps out. There, he meets Professor Donan, who is very impressed with Will, as he works during the day and then goes to school before returning to work at Gina's restaurant at night. Will tells Donan that he has to support himself and pay for his schooling since he's not good enough to get a scholarship. Donan tells him that if he participates in the Magic Festival, things might change. Will avoids talking about the festival, and Gina scolds him for chatting too much and not focusing on his work. He calls for a colleague because the restaurant is overcrowded with dwarfs, and he can't keep up with the work. Once the dwarfs finish their meal and leave, Rusty tells Will that the work at the restaurant is too much, and the pay is very low. He says if Will had asked Professor Wartner about work, he could have gotten him a better opportunity. Will says he doesn't want to trouble Professor Wartner any more than he already has, given all the problems caused by him. He also enjoys working with the dwarfs because they are the only ones in the city who know how to use their hands well, not magic wands like everyone else, and they remind him of himself in a way. At that moment, Julius enters the restaurant, looking disgusted. His friends tell him that this is the only restaurant open. When he sees Will working there, he mocks him. Donan tries to intervene, but Julius insults him, calling him one of the dwarfs. We then learn that since the last war, the dwarf city was destroyed, and they have been living in the city, working for the magicians, and everyone looks down on them because they don't have magic. Julius sits in the restaurant, mocking everything around him, even the food. He tells all the dwarfs present to leave his city because it will never be their place. This infuriates Will, and for the first time, he takes a stand. He approaches Julius and demands that he take back his words, as the dwarfs worked hard to make the food, and they still keep their traditions alive. He tells Julius not to mock these things. Julius retorts that Will is defending the dwarfs because neither of them has magical abilities. He then throws his food at Will's clothes, laughing at him. Will, now furious, grabs Julius's friends and throws them to the ground with all his strength. Julius, feeling insulted and challenged, freezes the whole area, attacking Will by binding him in ice. He then approaches Will and points his wand at his heart, ready to freeze him. But Will doesn't move or show any fear, which frustrates Julius. He tells Will that he won't feel satisfied unless he freezes him right here and orders him to join the magic festival and face him in front of everyone. Will agrees and breaks the ice binding him. He looks at Julius confidently and tells him that if he wins, Julius must apologize to the dwarfs and to Donan. But if Julius wins, he will finish him off and erase him from the academy entirely. The next day, the magic festival begins, and everyone gathers, including Will. The next day, it's the magic festival, and everyone gathers, including Will. He goes to prepare in his room, with Colette by his side, while the director sits outside among the audience, announcing the start of the festival. They begin with the first game, the Sky Race. Lehana stands out in the competition, flying on her dragon, impressing everyone and winning the first game. All eyes are on her as she's one of the top contenders in the festival. Meanwhile, Iris stands beside the director and gives her updates on the festival and the participants. Afterward, she asks for permission to leave, saying she's going to cheer for Will. We then see Cheyenne getting ready for the next match. His friends cheer him on as he prepares to compete in the crown assault competition. He's happy because he recalls when Colette asked him to join her team to win the competition. The reason for his happiness is that she chose him and not Will. But when he approaches her, he's shocked to find Will on their team. He asks Colette why Will is with them, and she tells him that in order to participate in the crown assault competition, the team's total points must be 21,000, and they had no choice but to ask Will to join, as his points are around 10,000. This is only because Will has a higher score with a total of 5,000 points. Will prepares and apologizes to Cheyenne for tricking him. Cheyenne, frustrated, asks why Will joined the festival in the first place and why he has to help him. Just then, Julius enters and looks at Will with a challenging stare. Will doesn't respond or acknowledge him, which angers Cheyenne further. Colette then says to Cheyenne that something happened between Will and Julius. Julius asked Will to join the crown assault to compete against each other, which is why they had to form a team and include Cheyenne. The competition begins, and the commentator, Maines, introduces the teachers who will be watching and judging the competition. He starts with Professor Edward, calling him the most disliked teacher in the academy, an unfair, evil, and frightening one who ruins the efforts and points of any student. He speaks as though he's voicing his true feelings. At this point, Edward stares at him with a gaze that terrifies everyone, including Maines, who immediately shifts to a more neutral tone and tells the elf witches to begin preparing for the crown assault game. The elf witches cast spells around the area, preparing the game for the crown assault. Meanwhile, Maines explains the rules of the competition to the crowd. There are 4 areas each team must pass through: the swamps, volcano, rough terrain, and the stone fields. These areas are all enchanted by the elves and filled with traps. Teams need to navigate these areas to reach the battlefield in the center of the crowd. The team that takes the crown from the battlefield will win. Teams are allowed to take the shortest path and do whatever it takes to reach the battlefield first. They can also disrupt the other teams. This competition is the strongest event of the entire festival, and the entire crowd eagerly awaits it. Maines, too, gets excited, revealing to everyone that he's betting on Vignal's team to win. As the teams prepare to take their positions, Wanker organizes them. He's shocked to see Will participating and asks him what he's doing there, worried for his safety and seeing the situation as dangerous. Will replies that for the first time, he really wants to win this game, especially in the festival. He apologizes to Wanker for not listening to his advice earlier and goes to take his place. Maines announces the start of the competition, and the first challenge they face is a large group of golem monsters. Teams must get past them to continue. Will is the first to run toward the monsters, and Colette casts a spell on his hand to strengthen his attack. With a single strike on the first monster, all the others around him fall to the ground from the force. Everyone is stunned by the power Will displayed, to the point that they spill their drinks in awe. Cheyenne stands aside, displeased, remembering the time Will saved him, a moment he finds deeply humiliating. At that time, Will was stronger than him, and since then, Cheyenne has been doing his best to prove to himself that he is stronger than Will. But now, Will is proving the opposite with his power. Everyone starts noticing Will, completely ignoring Cheyenne. Will continues through the trap-filled terrain, avoiding obstacles falling from above. Colette warns him as he deflects any attacks coming his way. With Colette's magic supporting him, he creates multiple swords around him and throws them at the surrounding monsters, defeating them all. As he moves through the rough terrain, the others try to hide their astonishment at Will's power, attributing it to Colette's magic. Meanwhile, Edward thinks to himself that Will's skills are the result of spending most of his time in the Aldemas, gaining experience with all these traps and monsters. They don't pose a problem for him. The other teams are frustrated to hear that Will's team is in the lead, including Julius, who is nervous about Will, but he doesn't care about winning. His mind is on something else. He reassures his team that they'll deal with Will soon. Will, now in the final stage, faces magical traps that trigger spells. He pauses for a moment, thinking about how to deal with them. He moves around each trap, disabling them by causing them to trigger against each other, effectively breaking them. This clever strategy works, and the traps destroy themselves. Maines, frustrated, teases Edward, saying the traps were his creation. After they finish with the enchanted land, they reach the tree area. Will thinks to himself that this is where all the teams are gathering and the battlefield is near. Since they're in the lead, they need to secure themselves and prepare for the final stretch, expecting an attack from any team. But just then, Julius arrives and casts a spell on Will, tearing his clothes. Everyone is shocked and confused, wondering how Julius managed to catch up even though they had been in the lead. Will tells Colette that they need to change their plan and attack Julius now. At that moment, Cheyenne appears behind them, casting a fire spell. Instead of aiming at Julius, he directs it at Will to take him out. Colette intervenes just in time, creating a barrier to protect Will from the flames. The fight shifts from being between Julius and Will to a three-way battle between Julius, Cheyenne, and Will. Cheyenne tells Julius to step aside because this battle is between him and Will, and it's not Julius's fight. Colette tries to stop them, but Julius notices her and traps the three of them in a freezing barrier while isolating her from the group. Will tries to calm Cheyenne down, telling him that this fight between them needs to end now, but Cheyenne refuses to listen. He demands Will draw his sword to start their battle and prove to himself that he's stronger than Will, the talentless one. At this moment, we learn the reason for Cheyenne's hatred toward Will. We flash back to when they were children in the academy and everyone was bullying Will, treating him terribly. During that time, Cheyenne felt really sorry for Will and tried to reduce the bullying he was experiencing. He even publicly offered him a spot in his group, hoping it would stop the bullying. But Will ignored him completely, didn't speak to him or even look at him because he was upset at the time, so Cheyenne left him alone and walked away. When Cheyenne walked after him and spoke to Will, Will asked him to stay away and refused to look at him or pay attention to him. Cheyenne, who hated being ignored, especially by others, became furious with Will at that moment. He started bullying him along with others, even becoming worse than them. Now, both of them are standing face to face, and Cheyenne is releasing all the hatred he has inside. The area around them, which was a forest, turns into a blazing volcano as Cheyenne quickly casts a series of powerful spells on Will. Will struggles to block all the attacks, finding it hard to keep up, which only frustrates Cheyenne further. He tells Will to stop defending and come at him, but Will doesn't want to attack Cheyenne since they are on the same team. He also thinks that his only real competitor now is Julius, and he starts to think deeply about whether to attack Cheyenne or just stay defensive. At this point, he grabs his mic and asks for Professor Edward's advice on the situation. Professor Edward tells him that Will has been progressing within his team, but the unexpected and unclear conflict between him and Cheyenne might cause them to lose. He expresses how much this conflict is wrong and shouldn't have happened, clearly annoyed, but his smile betrays a sense of schadenfreude. Will stands next to him, shocked by Edward's words and the expressions on his face, which are completely opposite of what he's saying. Meanwhile, the people watching, who know Will and how kind he is, feel bad for him because they know that Cheyenne will win and likely erase Will from the scene. Rusty is also sitting among the crowd, upset about his teammate, and Iris approaches him, asking to sit next to him. They turn out to know each other, and Rusty tells her she can sit comfortably. Iris cheers for Will, supporting him. Rusty is surprised and tells her he didn't expect her to be the type to sit and cheer for someone, thinking she was just following the crowd. Iris laughs and says that Will isn't just anyone, he deserves her support for what he did for her. Meanwhile, Julius enjoys teasing Colette a bit, leaving Will and Cheyenne to deal with each other until their fight is over. Colette runs away from Julius, trying to think of something to help Will, so she doesn't confront him directly. Julius taunts her, saying that if she keeps running, people will strip her of her title as the princess of the land. She becomes furious and tells him that if he repeats that again, she'll truly fight him. As for Julius, he casts a spell on himself, creating several copies that go to confront different different teams. However, Vignal sees through Julius' trick and quickly casts a spell to neutralize it before the copies can attack them. Julius' copies explode, dropping a chunk of ice. Vignal picks up a piece and muses to himself about the type of magic Julius used, confused about how he knew it. Meanwhile, everyone else is on edge due to the ongoing battle between Cheyenne and Will, unsure of who might win now. Jordan, Cheyenne's friend, is also perplexed by Cheyenne's actions, not understanding why he's going this far. He thought Cheyenne was participating in the competition to win and was proud of him. He tells his friend Lyral that he knows Cheyenne hates Will, but not to this extent. Meanwhile, Will recalls his childhood when he was constantly bullied and mocked for his studies, always being called a failure. When Cheyenne offered him to join his group, Will saw it as selfishness and just wanted to be left alone, to be forgotten by everyone. That's why he rejected Cheyenne's offer and chose to stay by himself at that time. Now, Cheyenne casts a spell, summoning a fire hawk to attack Will. Will tells himself that if he can defeat the hawk and take its core, he can stop Cheyenne. At this point, everyone, including Professor Edward, is in awe of Cheyenne for summoning such a powerful creature, and the Magiafander team has sent their members to participate in the tournament, with some acting as observers. When they see Cheyenne's skills, they are impressed and start looking into more details about him, hoping to recruit him. Will, standing before Cheyenne, asks him why he's doing all this, unable to find any convincing reason. Cheyenne gets even angrier and asks Will how he isn't furious and hating him like he hates Will. Will replies that he does hate him and has been waiting for the moment to get revenge for all the bullying. He then asks Cheyenne why he has hated and bullied him all these years. Cheyenne talks like a madman because Will truly doesn't know the reason, and he answers him. Cheyenne explains that he hates Will's determination, hope, and the way he ignores him. He always bullied him to get his attention. Seeing Will try so hard and not give up made Cheyenne feel worse, and each time he was ignored, his hatred for Will grew. He yells at Will to look at him every time he speaks and to never ignore him again. At this point, Will dons his offensive glasses and grabs his sword, ready to fight, as that's what Cheyenne wants. Cheyenne commands his hawk to finish Will, but as Will charges toward the hawk, he strikes it in half. Cheyenne doesn't give up and casts another spell to finish Will off, but Colette arrives just in time and creates a barrier between them. Will, running at full speed, crashes into the barrier without noticing and falls to the ground. Colette, looking angry and completely messed up, tells them to stop. Will gets up and asks her what happened to her and where Julius is. She tells him that as soon as she attacked Julius, he suddenly vanished and she couldn't find him. She asks Will to go after Julius and finish his fight while she handles things with Cheyenne. Will laughs at her, grabs his sword, and walks off. Cheyenne continues yelling and calling Will to come and fight. Meanwhile, Julius and his team arrive at the battlefield, and they are the first to reach the crown, only a few steps away from winning. But we see Will sprinting at full speed, leaping over the crowd, landing right in front of Julius, and challenging him in front of everyone. The next day, we find Ivy in her room in the Tower of Light, sleeping in a specific position to be able to look down at the earth. Cereza, a member of the ice team, enters and finds her sleeping, so she taps her head to wake her up. Cereza tells Ivy that she needs to think about her position as a Magiavander and stop watching what's happening below. She then hands Ivy a letter from the observers, which contains a list of candidates who might join their ice team. At the top of the list is Julius, who is a strong contender. Cereza points out Julius to Ivy, and Ivy agrees, saying that if the information is accurate, there's no problem with him joining. Cereza adds that Julius is remarkably powerful and might even replace her as a Magiavander someday. We return to the ongoing battle between Julius and Will. Julius is delighted to see Will and says that if they had won without facing each other, it would have been boring. Will replies that he won't leave the competition until Julius apologizes to Professor Donan and the dwarfs. Julius laughs at Will's words, calling him weak, and sees him as nothing more than a test subject to train on. Julius creates a thick mist of ice that completely obscures their vision. Will tries to listen to the sounds of their movements to determine their location. He realizes they are trying to corner him, and a large ice ball attacks Will. He evades it and sees Julius standing in front of him. Will tries to attack, but another ice ball hits him, and he's unable to reach Julius. Julius mocks him, saying that they haven't moved from their positions yet. Suddenly, everyone is shocked, and we find that in the battlefield, there are more than 6 copies of Julius, while Will is standing, confused. He understands that Julius is using illusion magic, and he doesn't know how to proceed. Julius attacks Will and casts a freezing spell on him. It's then revealed that everyone is stunned by Julius' power because he has used one of Ivy's secret spells, one that no one knew she had mastered. Will is also shocked and asks Julius how he managed to use Ivy's magic. Julius laughs, claiming that it's a natural talent of his and that he learned it through training alone. He tells Will that Ivy isn't as special as he thinks, and soon he'll surpass her and become a Magiavander. Will, upset by Julius' disrespect toward Ivy, breaks the ice around him and charges at Julius as fast as he can. But Julius' copies attack him at the same time, following his orders precisely. Will can't reach the real Julius, as he creates a much stronger barrier this time, which Will can't break through. Julius laughs at Will and casts another spell, creating a massive ice ball to consume the barrier along with Will. Everyone is still shocked by Julius' abilities. Even Professor Edward admits that Julius truly deserves the title of wizard, and his points are well earned. Julius stands proudly in front of everyone, boasting that he will be Ivy's successor. Iris watches the battle, analyzing everything that's happening. She's aware and confident that this battle is far from over. Indeed, Will breaks through the ice barrier with his sword and exits, thanking Julius for providing him with the chance to calm down. He tells Julius that as long as he's angry, he can't control himself or think properly. Julius, frustrated, vows to humiliate Will in a way no one will expect. In an instant, Will jumps over Julius' team members and eliminates them from behind without them even noticing. They fall to the ground, and Julius' copies begin to collapse. Will tells Julius that his magic isn't as powerful as he thinks. Even his spell wasn't strong enough, and he reveals that Julius was using Ivy's spell with the help of his teammates, who gave him the strength to use it for a longer period because his abilities only allow him to use it briefly. Will then tells Julius that he is far from being able to stand against Ivy or challenge her. Julius is shocked, not understanding how Will figured out his trick. He becomes furious and casts random spells at Will, but Will remains calm and focused, blocking every attack with ease. Julius grows increasingly tense, trying to reassure himself, saying that even though Will figured out his trick, he'll never know which version of Julius is the real one. Before Julius can finish his sentence, he realizes that Will is running straight toward him, not toward any of his copies. Julius quickly creates a barrier to prevent Will from reaching him, but Will breaks through the ice barrier effortlessly. Julius steps back and asks him how he figured out which version of him was the real one. Will simply answers that the temperature of a human is between 36 to 37 degrees, while the copies made of ice are colder, allowing him to detect them by the cold seeping from their legs. Julius looks at his copies and realizes that all of them are cold to the touch, and he becomes even more enraged by Will's sharp intellect. He asks how a talentless person like him could figure out all of this so easily and expose his plan. Will replies that he's known Ivy since they were children. They were both orphans and grew up together. Since he was young, he loved watching Ivy perform her magic, and he studied it carefully. That's why he understands her magic better than anyone else. Meanwhile, Ivy overhears and is deeply affected. She tells her assistant that maybe Julius is more suited to replace her, but that's not what she really needs. She thinks of Will and wishes that he could be the one by her side instead of Julius. At that moment, Julius, tired of hearing Will's words, tells him to stop talking because he still can't believe that a failure like Will can understand or know anything about the magic of the Magia Vandra. He casts random spells on Will, but Will blocks them with his sword. Julius is then hit by a shock and falls to the ground, stunned by what happened. Will, wanting to shock him even more, tells Julius that the spell he's so proud of learning from Ivy was created by her when she was only 2 years old. So of course, it's still imperfect, and she hasn't fully developed it yet. Julius is stunned because it means his level of magic is that of a child, and he had thought he could surpass Ivy just because he was able to expose her spell before becoming a Magia Vandra. In his shock and anger, Julius loses control and creates more than 10 copies of himself, far more than the 4 he could previously make. But Will doesn't care about the number of copies. Any spell that comes from Julius or his copies, he blocks easily. He runs toward the first copy and destroys it with his sword. Julius, the original, starts running and casting spells while ordering his copies to finish Will off. But Will uses his speed and skill to take down every single copy, one after another. Julius becomes terrified and starts running away, but Will chases after him. When Julius tires out and stops, he says to Will to wait, but Will strikes him in the face, breaking his tooth and sending him flying so hard that he crashes into the wall and falls to the ground. At that moment, the first voice we hear is Main's, shouting into the microphone, announcing that the talentless Will has defeated Julius, who had more than 10,000 points. The crowd is in shock, cheering for Will. Rusty is overjoyed for his friend, and Colette, seeing him from a distance, rushes to him, thrilled. Now, there's nothing left for them to do but claim the crown. As Will stands up, proud of his victory, he finds Vignal waiting for him, having already claimed the crown. Vignal is the one who wins the competition, but Will isn't upset, because the most important thing to him was fulfilling his promise to the dwarfs. Meanwhile, Cheyenne stands off in the distance, looking at Will with hatred, vowing that he will be the one to destroy him. At night, Will, Colette, Professor Wartner, and Rusty gather at Gina's restaurant, where all the dwarfs are present. They've invited Will to dinner to thank him for standing up to Julius and fighting for them. They're all incredibly proud of him, and even Professor Warkner considers Will like a son, thanking Donan for taking care of Will during the past period. Donan then asks Will if the institution has chosen him and whether he will be going to the tower soon. Colette answers him, upset, saying that hasn't happened yet because they were too busy fighting during the game, all because of Cheyenne. Rusty asks Will where Cheyenne is. Will tells him that he went to invite him to the restaurant, but all he said was that he'd never have dinner with a talentless person like him. Donan reassures Will, thanking him once again for getting justice from Julius, and everyone laughs. Meanwhile, Julius is in the kitchen washing dishes, looking sad. The ice team didn't pick him because he didn't win the competition, and this time, he's truly humiliated by Gina and the dwarfs because he can't do his job properly. Everyone is mocking him, laughing at his situation. Professor Warkner tells Colette that he's curious about tomorrow because he expects the students at school to treat Will much better. Colette understands what he means and says that it's likely they'll treat Will better, and everything will become clearer the next day. When Will goes to school with Colette the following day, they find two students running toward him, asking if he'd join their team and gather points together in the Aldemus. Will and Colette are speechless from the surprise. Then two more students arrive, arguing with the first two, insisting Will choose them. Other students begin to gather, all wanting Will to join their team, knowing that he's talented and would be a great asset for monster hunting in the Aldemus. Colette steps in between them, angrily telling them that they're being selfish, wanting Will just for their own benefit. She tells them to leave him alone because they've upset him. When she looks at Will, she sees butterflies flying around him, and he jumps with joy, saying he can't believe he's going to have friends. Colette becomes visibly upset and starts arguing with them, while they argue back, prompting her to make an excuse that Will is busy and they're going shopping tomorrow instead. After Colette returns to her room, she jumps onto her bed, feeling very embarrassed about what she said because she didn't mean to imply that she'd go out with Will, as the entire school now believes they are involved. Then, her friend Rose enters and tries to calm her down, asking what she's going to do tomorrow. Colette says she's not sure yet, and Rose suggests that she should go out with Will to prove the rumors about them are true and not embarrass him in front of the students who wanted him to join their team in the Aldemus. Meanwhile, Will is in his room with Rusty. Rusty asks him if he's going to the Aldemus tomorrow. Will replies that he's going shopping with Colette, as she asked him to get some magical supplies for the academy. The next day, Colette wakes up early, gets ready, wears her best dress, and waits for Will. When she sees him, she's excited, and Will tells her she looks great today. She gets shy, but then she's shocked when Rusty suddenly runs toward them, apologizing for being late. Colette looks at Will, and he explains that Rusty wanted to join them because he loves shopping and needs to buy a few things as well. Rusty enjoys teasing Colette because he knows she has feelings for Will, and he takes Will's hand, replacing her, to annoy her. He stays close to them throughout the trip, not letting them be alone. Eventually, Colette grows upset and sits by herself. Will notices and asks her what's wrong. She tells him she's upset with Rusty, and Will explains that Rusty has been his friend for a long time, and they've always been close, like brothers, especially since Rusty was the one who took care of him when he was younger. Just then, Rusty arrives and interrupts their conversation. Colette tells Will to go fix his sword while she and Rusty will catch up with him soon. As soon as Will walks away, Colette vents her frustrations by arguing with Rusty. Meanwhile, Will is walking and runs into a girl who wants to talk to him. He's thrilled, as he's very fond of her and her abilities. He's amazed that she's even standing there, talking to him. She takes him to her house. Once they arrive, Will is surprised to find Julius, Vignal, and Cheyenne there. Lihana explains that at the end of the year, the practical training will begin for all students. She wants them, as a group of 5, to work together in the Aldemus. However, Cheyenne is not happy with the idea and doesn't want Will on the team. Julius, too, seems unwilling and wants to get rid of Will. But before he can act, Cheyenne stops him and grabs Will to strike him. At this point, Vignal intervenes, casting an illusion spell to surround them with flowers and trees, calming the tension. He tells them that since when have mages turned into bullies like dwarfs? These words cool everyone down, and they sit. Vignal asks Lihana to continue, and she says that Will has something unique that they don't, and he'll be incredibly useful in the Aldemus. She believes he's a student they can't afford to lose. Cheyenne and Julius express their disdain, criticizing Will's acrobatic tricks in the competition and how they don't want him on their team. Vignal, however, responds that only 2 failures would say something like that, as Will defeated both of them with his tricks. He reminds them of everything Will accomplished in the competition, defeating monsters, breaking traps, and his sharp intelligence. He also mentions that while Lihana excelled in the first game, he respects her and would accept Will on the team if she wants him there. Lihana replies that she's focusing on the future and herself, aiming to make it to the high institution and become the most famous one in the world. Will, surprised, asks her if she had joined the lightning group. Lehana confirms they reached out to her, but she wants to be honest with him. She tells him that everyone in the academy sees the high institution as something for the leftovers, and her family has already made significant achievements. She wants to be like them and doesn't care about joining the high institution or the Tower of Light. Her true goal is to become the 5th mangacapped. She asks if they all agree, then throws a coin into a cup. They all throw their coins in, agreeing that they have shared interests and must push themselves and endure together. After the meeting, Will returns to Colette and Rusty, who are very worried about him. He tells them he's joining Lehana's team for the practical training. The next day, he goes to school, attending Professor Wartner's class. Wartner explains that practical training will begin in 10 days, lasting a week, and students will be allowed to move between floors 1 through 10. This training is a great opportunity as they can earn over 1,000 points in a week. However, he warns them that the situation is dangerous, and some might even die. There will be camps in the aldemas with safe zones for students who want to withdraw, and professors will be present in case anything happens. After 10 days, everyone gathers in the aldemas, where Professors Wartner and Edward explain the rules and introduce them to the areas. Colette refuses to leave Will and stays with him in Lehana's team. While the whole academy is gathered in the aldemas, the mangacapped is in the Tower of Light talking to someone named Logel. Logel tells him that he's the most suitable for the task, as the other mangacapped would be ineffective. Cariot says this means the barrier on the sky is about to collapse, but we still don't understand exactly what they mean by their words. In the aldemas, Professor Wartner announces the start of the training, and all the students rush ahead, including Will. However, Lehana calms him down by having Vignal cast a spell that lifts them into the air, taking them to a deep area in the aldemas. They encounter a massive swarm of giant ants. Will is eager to attack and hunt them, but Vignal stops him, saying Lehana comes from a family of warriors, and she will handle the task. Indeed, as soon as they finish talking, Lehana casts a single spell that wipes out the entire swarm of ants. They continue walking and face many more monsters. All the team members hunt and defeat the monsters except Will, who, every time he attempts to defeat a monster, finds his teammates using their spells to defeat it in a second. He becomes anxious, overwhelmed by the constant use of magic, and sometimes even hinders his teammates, preventing them from moving properly. Finally, he spots a monster and quickly hunts it before anyone else can. However, when he turns around, he finds Vignal has already defeated another swarm of monsters with another spell. He stands there, shocked by their speed, thinking to himself that if this continues, everyone will take all the points while he will be left with nothing. Vignal then tells Will that he's been slowing them down and expresses doubt about Lehana's judgment. He starts to think that Will has no use in the team as they initially thought. Lehana tells them to be patient, as they're just getting started, and they don't know when they might need Will. After completing the hunting in their area, they leave the monsters' bodies behind. Will says they need to take the bodies as proof to earn points, but they look at him with confusion, telling him that the monsters are weak, and their points are too low to be worth the effort. Will is taken aback and collects the bodies himself to earn the points. It's clear that he's upset, so Colette tries to calm him down. Will says that he needs to get closer to the team to earn their trust. Then Lehana tells them that a day has passed, and they need to rest. They set up camp, and Vignal creates an illusionary fire around them to scare off any approaching monsters. Will is amazed by his magic. Lehana asks Will to distribute the food among the team. Without thinking, Will rushes to the bag, grabs the food, and starts giving it to everyone. When he gets to Vignal, Vignal stops him, telling him to put the food aside as he'll take it. Will is confused. Vignal tells him that he comes from an elf lineage, and elves don't like being touched by anyone lesser than them. The only person allowed to handle them is Lehana because she is on the same level as him. Colette is upset by his words and tells him that they are all on the same team and shouldn't be acting superior to each other. But Will stops her, telling her that it's fine, as he understands that this is the elf's custom. At this moment, Lehana speaks up, saying that after they rest, their next goal is to hunt the monster Nibiros. She explains that Nibiros is the last of its kind and worth 110 points by itself. It's located on the 10th floor, and she specifically formed this team to target this monster because it's incredibly strong, and no one could defeat it alone. They tell her that Nibiros is still on the 10th floor, and it's too early to face it. However, Lehana insists that they go after it first while they're still in good condition. Afterward, they can hunt the weaker monsters. If they manage to defeat it, they'll prove themselves to the institution. They need to find a shortcut to reach the 10th floor quickly. Will is a bit anxious, worried about the monster, since he's only managed to gather 5 points on his own. But he gathers his courage and focuses on Ivy as his goal to keep going. They eventually find a shortcut and reach the 10th floor quickly. But when they arrive, they find the bodies of monsters scattered all around, which confuses them. They wonder if another team has already hunted them. Vignal says this is impossible, as they're the first team to reach the 10th floor. Will stops in front of a monster's body and realizes that the monster has been cut, not killed by magic. At this moment, Lehana pauses and says that this is Nibiru's lair. As soon as they enter, Will feels an eerie calm in the air. Suddenly, they are all shocked when they discover that the monster is dead, but its magical energy hasn't been drained, meaning someone killed it easily. They look around, trying to figure out who could have done this. Just then, Will looks up and warns everyone that a monster is above them. They panic as the monster drops down and strikes Vignal, knocking him out, and destroys the ground beneath them. They all fall, and Will tries to hold on to Vignal but is unable to because of the falling rocks. The force of the monster's strike causes the entire area to tremble, and the other teams and camps feel the quake. The team finds themselves in the 11th floor, which means they've crossed the academy's designated boundary and entered a very dangerous area. Only senior mages are allowed in such places. Will falls into the 11th floor as well, but in a different area with Vignal. He finds that Vignal's arm is injured and needs medical attention. Lehana and Colette are also on the 11th floor, in a different location from the others. Lehana tells Colette that they need to gather the team again because if they stay separated, they'll be hunted by the monsters and could die. Meanwhile, Vignal begins to have nightmares about his childhood. He wakes up to the sound of Will defeating a huge monster, shocked that Will manage to do it alone. As soon as Will sees him awake, he rushes over to check if he's okay and tries to help with his arm. But Vignal stops him, saying not to touch him, as he'll treat it himself. He wraps his arm and tells Will that they need to find the rest of the team quickly. They can't stay in the 11th floor for more than a day, and they must return to the 10th floor to figure out what to do about the monster there. Back at the academy, there is chaos in the camps as the monsters begin attacking all at once. Some professors are dead in strange ways, their heads severed. Professor Warkner contacts the other professors in the other floors, realizing that something strange is happening. He starts wondering what's going on in the Aldemas this year and if someone is behind this plot. At the same time, Edward runs up to him and tells him that they need to cancel the practical training this year immediately because something is off in the Aldemas, and many students and professors are dying. Meanwhile, Will and the injured Vignal continue walking through the 11th floor. Vignal occasionally casts a spell called the Search spell to help detect any monsters approaching. Will tells him that the spell will wear them out. Vignal responds by saying that he doesn't understand how Will can remain calm and speak so coldly. Will replies that the spell works over a certain distance, and once they exceed that range, he'll tell Vignal when to cast it properly. He asks him to relax and save his magic because they'll need it soon if a monster attacks them. Before Will can finish his sentence, he sees two monsters coming toward them. He runs quickly without hesitation, trying to take them down. Vignal, nervous, casts a random spell, surprised by Will's calmness and ability to control himself in such situations. When Vignal is focused on Will and doesn't notice, one of the monsters attacks him. Will quickly saves him, but Vignal is so scared that he screams when he sees the monster. At that moment, Vignal becomes very upset with himself and tells Will that he's weak, not like what Will thought. He shares that he has been at the academy for 6 years, and during that time, his entire family and team managed to get into the tower and join a Magia Vander team, except for him. This is because his illusion magic creates the illusion of fire, but this fire doesn't have the same effect as real fire. Since then, his family has been extremely disappointed in him, and they've been bullying him because he's the weakest among them. He tells Will that, as Lehana mentioned, they are considered leftovers. At this moment, we see Lehana speaking with Colette, saying that she knows the institution will never choose them to become Magia Vander, as it had already made its decisions a long time ago. They are just a formality. She explains that they don't choose based on strength but rather based on genuine talent, like Ivy, who had real magic since the first year, which is why the institution chose her. Vignal tells Will that when he was younger, he had a sister named Eleanor, who is now one of the 4 Magia Vander. Both of them loved magic, but Eleanor was special and had real talent from a young age. That's why the institution chose her and took her from him by force. For all these years, Vignal has been trying his best to catch up to her, but it has been futile. Will tells him that he always felt there was something in common between them because it's the same story as his with Ivy. He comforts Vignal, telling him that he's amazing and encourages him. He says he'll protect him until he's able to recover and use his power again to fight the monsters. Indeed, Will fights all the monsters alone while Vignal watches, proud and surprised that Will has been able to endure and hasn't gotten tired. He thanks Will for not abandoning him like his family and team did. At this moment, Kiki sounds a warning, and Will realizes there are monsters around them. Vignal casts a search spell, but there are no monsters nearby. Will figures out that the Aldemas is creating the monsters because they've finished. Suddenly, they find a massive creature descending from the Aldemas. It releases a strange green liquid that floods the area, creating a long fiery monster. Will warns Vignal that these monsters are dangerous, known as bakars, and they aren't affected by physical or magical attacks because their bodies are extremely tough. These monsters are categorized by the Academy as enemies of mages, and the only thing that can affect them is illusion magic. Will asks Vignal to help him because he won't be able to take down the monsters alone. Vignal panics and says he can't do anything because his illusion magic is very weak. He starts crying, and Will calms him down, telling him that even if they fail, nothing will happen because everyone makes mistakes. No one is perfect. Vignal says that if he makes a mistake this time, he'll die. But Will reassures him, telling him they won't die because they haven't achieved their dreams yet and they won't die until they do. Will grabs his sword, runs at the monster, and tells Vignal to try again. When Vignal sees that Will's sword isn't effective against the monster, he decides to try, just as Will told him. But when he casts the illusion spell, it's still weak, and the monster turns its attention to Will. The monster blows fire at Will, but Kiki stands in front of the fire, trying to block it to protect Will. At this moment, Will tells Vignal to try again and not give up, reassuring him that he believes in him. Vignal decides not to be afraid or listen to what his family has told him. Will's words give him the confidence and drive to believe in himself again. He casts the illusion spell again, and this time it works, affecting the monster and defeating it. Will is extremely happy for him, and Vignal bows in respect to Will, apologizing for anything bad he said to him earlier. Will tells him that he's always seen him as an amazing elf and his role model, never doubting his abilities. He says that they need to find Colette, Lihana, and Kiki and that Kiki will help them. He pulls out a magical map from Rusty's belongings, saying that the map will help them find their way out of the area. Meanwhile, Julius and Cheyenne are still on the 11th floor, both extremely thirsty and exhausted, unable to stand each other. Suddenly, they hear the sound of monsters. When Cheyenne looks at them, he realizes that these monsters are the same kind that Will defeated when he was with Cheyenne in the Aldemus. Cheyenne is very upset and stands in front of the monsters, determined to take them down. He orders Julius to create several copies of himself. He's incredibly angry because this monster is the one that humiliated him in front of Will. The number of these monsters is enormous, to the point that they start attacking other teams and professors in the academy. Professor Edward tries to take them down, with Professor Wartner assisting him. Wartner says that they're trying to gather all the teams because most of them haven't surpassed the 8th level, except for one team, Lihana's team, who's on the 10th floor. Professor Edward says that the 10th floor is huge, and searching for them there is risky and nearly impossible. Wartner tells him that he'll be able to locate them with Kiki's help. Meanwhile, Colette and Lihana are also tired, and Colette keeps throwing things from her bag with every step she takes to help Will find them. At this moment, Lihana apologizes, saying that it's her fault for getting them into the 11th floor because of her high ambition. Colette tells her that it's not her fault, as everything happened because of the monster that surprised them. If they're going to blame each other, she's also to blame for joining the team against their will. She reassures Lihana, saying she's confident that Will come and find them. At this time, Will finally reaches Cheyenne and Julius and is surprised to see that Cheyenne has already defeated an entire swarm of monsters alone. When Cheyenne sees Will, he's upset because he's still alive. Will, however, is happy and tells Cheyenne that he's glad he found him and Julius. He asks about Colette and Lihana, but Cheyenne tells him they don't know anything about them. As for Colette and Lihana, they are shocked to find two mages, one of whom has decapitated the head of their professor and is playing with it. Colette asks who they are, and they tell her they are just ordinary evil people here to destroy the fake sky. Colette and Lihana realize that they're referring to the Magia Vander barrier and that the evil ones have cast a spell to decapitate them. Just in time, Will arrives and breaks the spell with his sword. Suddenly, a huge creature called the Rooster Beast appears before them. Will, upon seeing it, tells everyone that he has read about this creature. It's worth 270 points and is one of the most dangerous types of monsters. They must quickly escape and avoid any of its attacks. They all run, except Vignal, who stands his ground and creates an illusionary wall. However, the creature breaks the wall and attacks Vignal. Will quickly saves him, and they both run until they manage to escape and stop to catch their breath. They ask Will about the creature. He tells them that this creature should be in the 25th floor. They are surprised and wonder how it managed to reach the 11th floor. Lihana suggests that it has something to do with the sorcerers they met earlier. Will looks down at the monsters, which are still searching for them. Julius gets angry, saying that at this rate, they won't be able to escape and will die there. Will tells them that there's only one solution: to defeat the giant rooster beast because it's controlling the other monsters. If they can take it down, the other monsters will scatter and they can find an escape route. Julius asks how they can possibly defeat such a monster alone. Will tells him that he has a plan, but they aren't able to help him because his plan doesn't rely on magic. Julius says he will never trust him. Vignal steps in and says that Will has saved him many times before. He tells everyone that he trusts Will 100% and asks Lehana to trust him the same way. Lehana agrees, saying that she was wrong in the past when she gave him orders in the team. He should have been the leader from the start, and they should have followed his orders. Cheyenne also agrees that this is the only solution and they must listen to Will. Julius tries to convince them not to listen to Will, but Will tells him that he can't carry out his plan without his help. He asks Julius to lend him his strength and promises to teach him another of Ivy's secret spells. Julius agrees, and they put their plan into action. They all gather around the rooster beast, surrounding it. They start attacking it, jumping and distracting it. Julius creates several copies of himself, and they all attack the monster simultaneously, making it confused. But they find that its wings are very strong, and its body is unaffected by any attack. Even Will tries to jump onto the monster and stab it with his sword, but it doesn't work. Will realizes that they need to distract the monster until Julius can cast his spell and destroy it, but when Julius casts Ivy's spell, the monster resists and isn't affected. Will had anticipated this and came up with a backup plan. He tells Lehana that the monster's wings are now slower because of Julius's spell and orders her to run and kill the monster, just like she did with the swarm of ants. Lehana follows his orders and runs, but she suddenly finds a barrier in front of her that prevents her from using her spell. A lightning bolt strikes Will. Kiki tries to form a barrier around him to protect him, but the lightning is so powerful that it destroys the barrier and Will's glasses. Meanwhile, Professors Wartner and Edward are on their way, watching everything unfold through a magical crystal. Professor Edward tells Wartner to hurry so they can reach the students in time. Will falls to the ground, injured and shocked by his broken glasses, which were a gift from Ivy. Lehana tells them to leave and that she will face the monster alone because she is the one responsible for everything that's happening. Vignal tells her that he will stay with her and the two of them will fight the monster together. Colette tries to stop them but can't. Cheyenne is also anxious, wanting to escape but not wanting to leave Vignal and Lehana. Will tells Cheyenne to strike him and snap him out of it because he, too, is anxious and unable to think clearly after his glasses were broken. Cheyenne punches him hard and tells him that he's the reason they ended up in this situation and forced them to fight the monster. He gave them all hope, and it's not right for him to give up and make them panic too. He continues to hit Will until Will is bleeding. Then, Will stops him himself and thanks him for snapping him out of it. He gets up with all his courage, grabs his sword, and joins Lehana and Vignal. Cheyenne is surprised and asks how Will is so calm and composed despite everything that's happening. Colette explodes at them, saying that Will is more scared than anyone because he's the only one holding a sword and is forced to fight the monsters up close, unlike using a magic wand from a distance. He's always been scared, but his biggest fear is running away, which is why he keeps going. Now, he's showing bravery, and she grabs her wand and joins them in fighting the monster. Will tells her that Vignal and Lehana are too tired to continue, and they must cut the rooster beast's wings themselves. Colette casts a spell to protect Will while he reaches the wings to cut them, but the rooster beast creates a barrier around itself and shoots multiple lightning bolts at them. At that moment, Cheyenne arrives on his fiery bird and casts his strongest spell to make his bird attack the rooster beast and cut its wings. But the spell doesn't work, and the rooster beast destroys the bird. Everyone watches in shock. Cheyenne says that the magic wand isn't working, and Will also says that the sword isn't effective. They can't think of what to do next when suddenly, a crystal falls next to Will. As soon as he picks it up, he has an idea. He keeps repeating magic wand and sword, and they don't understand him until Cheyenne figures out what he means. He casts a fire spell and throws it onto Will's sword. The sword absorbs the spell, and flames erupt from it. Will is able to combine the magic wand and the sword at the same time. Everyone watches, stunned, including Professor Edward, who is watching through the crystal. Will runs towards the rooster beast, leaps onto it, and slashes it with his sword, cutting it in half. The whole academy looks at Will with pride and respect this time. Colette calls out to him, happy and thinking they've won the battle, but they're shocked when a pack of monsters approaches. Vignal says that the monsters must have realized their king is dead. Colette tells them that they're exhausted and have no strength left to fight, and they're all scared. One of the monsters almost attacks Julius, and Professors Edward and Wartner try to hurry to reach the students. Suddenly, a light fills the area, wiping out the monsters and saving the students. They discover that the king of the Magia Fander, the king of light, has come personally to help them. Will is surprised and wonders what brought the king here. The king greets them all and tells them that they fought bravely, honoring them. Everyone is thrilled that the king himself has said this. Will, however, notices someone with the king wearing black, and the person looks down at Will and asks for his name. After that, they all head back and finally exit the Aldemas, heading to the academy. All the students and teachers are in shock from what happened, and they learn that over 11 11 teachers have died, but nothing happened to the students. The team sits, saddened and upset about the teachers who passed, and they ask themselves about the 2 villains they saw in the Aldemas. Colette tells them that the academy couldn't find any trace of them or understand the cause of the strange events that happened. Lehana thanks them all and says that they were a great team together and that this team was the best thing that happened in the training. She's hungry, so Colette goes to bring a tray of apples and feeds it to Lehana. But Lehana doesn't stop at 1 or 2, she finishes the entire tray. Colette gets upset because there's nothing left for Will to eat. Lehana says that she performed a lot of magic in the Aldemas, which drained her energy, so she eats a lot, and it's not usual for her. She continues talking about Will and thanks him again. Julius keeps making fun of Will, and Colette brings him food, shoving it in his mouth to the point where he almost chokes. Cheyenne asks Will how he did it in the Aldemas and how the sword managed to absorb his magic. Julius starts speaking again, saying it must not have been anything important. When Julius mocks Will again, Kiki gets tired of it and scratches his face. Will tells them that he doesn't know how he managed to do it. Lehana tells them that they should ask Professor Wartner or Edward because she feels that what happened was very special. Will remembers the young boy from the Aldemas and asks his friends about him. They tell him that the boy is from the Fen tribe, which has no magical abilities but knows the Aldemas very well. They're considered guides and discovered the underground levels in the Aldemas. Will tells them that he wants to ask more about this boy because he felt something strange about him. Afterward, Will goes down to practice with his sword. Julius, Cheyenne, and Vignal watch him from above, not understanding how he can train with his injuries. Cheyenne gets frustrated and says that if Will can train and hold his sword, then he can too. He calls out to Will from above, asking him to fight him. Will looks at him and tells him that this is not the right time. Cheyenne jumps out of the window, injured, and everyone tries to calm him down, telling him to save the fight for later. But Cheyenne says that during the tag battle tournament, Will promised him that one day they would have a small fight, and now is the time. Will agrees, grabs his sword, and fights Cheyenne. They have fun, laughing and running after each other, with Cheyenne throwing spells and Will deflecting them. They jump around the academy. Professor Wartner chases after them, trying to stop them from what they're doing, while Professor Edward walks by, uninterested. They all have a good time together. Some time passes, and it's the time for the end-of-year exams. Will holds the paper and starts solving it, with his mind focused on finishing the exam, earning as many points as possible, and meeting Ivy.